Let's be honest, the world today can feel chaotic, unpredictable, and frankly, a little scary. But what if all this turbulence we're feeling isn't random at all? What if it's part of a much larger pattern that's been repeating for centuries? Well, to figure that out, we're going to dig into the work of investor Ray Dalio, who believes history can give us a map for what's ahead.
You can feel our world being pulled apart by these massive divisions, and so much of it really starts with money. The gap between the ultra-rich and, well, everyone else has become a chasm. We're practically living in two different economies.
And you know, these economic divides just pour gasoline on our political conflicts. We've gone way beyond simple disagreement. Now it feels like each side sees the other as an enemy, which makes compromise seem like a thing of the past.
On top of all that, our shared sense of what's even real is just shattering. Think about this. Trust in the media has dropped from over 70% back in the 70s to just over 40% today. I mean, how are we supposed to solve our biggest problems if we can't even agree on the basic facts?
So, this all leads to one massive question, right? Are we just unlucky, facing some random storm of crises? Or is there a predictable pattern at play here, a cycle that has brought down empires for centuries?
All these pressures are creating a world that feels dangerously, well, off balance.
To make sense of it all, Ray Dalio offers this really powerful idea he calls the big cycle.
So, what is the big cycle? Think of it like a template for history. It shows how empires, again and again, rise and fall in a predictable sequence. They climb out of chaos, they achieve greatness, and then, almost inevitably, they decline, which paves the way for the next great power. And Dalio argues this isn't an accident. It's driven by timeless and universal forces. So what does this cycle actually look like? Well, it has about 6 main stages. First, a new order rises from the ashes of the old one. This new stability sparks a ton of innovation and prosperity. Then, the empire hits its absolute peak as the dominant world power. But this is where the turn happens. The empire gets overextended, it gets buried in debt, and it starts getting torn apart by fights at home. This kicks off a period of decline and conflict until finally the old order collapses, and the whole cycle starts over again. Now this might sound a little abstract, but check this out. This chart puts the theory into practice. Just follow the line for the British Empire. You can see its rise after its civil war, its peak during the Industrial Revolution, and then its decline after 2 world wars, right as the United States was taking its place. It's a perfect example of the big cycle playing out over 400 years. Okay, so we've seen the what. Now let's get into the why. What are the actual forces that are driving this cycle again and again? Dalio boils it down to 3 key engines: money and credit, internal order, and external order. An empire's survival really depends on keeping all 3 of these in balance. When they all turn negative at the same time, that's when you get a perfect storm for collapse. Let's look at that internal order cycle with a classic example, the French Revolution. On the eve of the Revolution, French society was just dangerously unbalanced. You had just 2% of the population, the clergy and nobility, holding almost all the wealth and power, while the other 98% had next to nothing. That kind of inequality is a classic, flashing red light of an internal breakdown. And when the internal order breaks down, the financial order often isn't far behind. The new government, totally desperate for cash, did what desperate governments often do. They just started printing money. In this chart, well, this chart shows the result: a massive, massive spike in inflation. And the result of that? Between 1792 and 1796, the French currency completely collapsed. It became worthless. It wiped out savings, it destroyed the economy, and it created absolute chaos. It's a pretty stark reminder of just how fast financial stability can vanish. And right on schedule, just as the cycle predicts, a strong leader emerges from all that chaos to seize control. Napoleon Bonaparte consolidated power, he stabilized the economy, and he established a new order, beginning the cycle all over again. Okay, so this is way more than just a history lesson. This framework gives us a powerful and, maybe a little unsettling way to look at our world today, especially the rivalry between the United States and China.
These charts really tell the story. On the left, you can see the slow, relative decline of the U.S. since its peak after World War II, and at the same time, the meteoric rise of China. The chart on the right kind of shows the why. The U.S. has been running this massive trade deficit while China has built a huge surplus, giving it incredible financial power. This is the external order cycle in action. We are watching the classic dynamic of a rising, productive empire challenging the dominant but increasingly indebted world power.
Meanwhile, back inside the U.S., that internal order cycle is under immense pressure. The charts on the left show that wealth concentration is at its highest level since the 1930s. And on the right, you can see the political parties are more divided than at any point in the last 100 years.
And this isn't just about policy disagreements anymore. The divide has become deeply personal. A study in 2019 found that majorities in both parties now believe the other side doesn't even share their core values. That's a huge sign of a society that's losing its common ground.
So, with financial, internal, and external pressures all seeming to peak at once, the huge question is, what comes next? You know, history doesn't give us the exact answer, but it does give us a map of what's possible. And the most immediate challenge might be the one captured in this quote. If we can't agree on basic facts, how can we possibly navigate a crisis? The question isn't just what the future holds, it's whether we still have what it takes to build it together.